On a stormy night in a quiet American town, an old woman was startled by furious barking outside her door. When she opened it, she froze. Standing in the rain was a battle-scarred K9 trembling, with a little girl unconscious on its back. The child's lips were blue, her tiny hands limp, and the dog's desperate eyes seemed to beg, "Help us before it's too late." That moment was only the beginning of a story about courage, prejudice, and the silent strength of those who refuse to look away. Would you have opened your door to that dog in the middle of the night? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you believe kindness can change the world, stay with us. Thank you for being here, and may your day be filled with hope. The rain came down in sheets over Riverton Hills, a relentless storm that turned the narrow roads into rivers of glistening black. Thunder cracked across the hillsides and the trees bent under the wind, their branches clawing at the sky like desperate fingers. On one of those lonely stretches of highway, a truck moved cautiously, headlights fighting through the curtain of water, tires hissing against the pavement. Inside, Jack Carter, a 45-year-old veteran, sat behind the wheel, his posture straight and his hands firm on the steering wheel. His face carried the weight of years spent in uniform, his jaw strong and eyes sharp despite the exhaustion of civilian life. He was a man who had seen chaos before, and tonight his instincts were uneasy, as though the storm itself was a warning. Beside him sat Emily, his 4-year-old daughter, strapped safely in her seat, clutching a worn teddy bear to her chest. Her hair curled against her cheeks, damp with the humidity, and her big brown eyes flickered between fear and fascination each time lightning split the sky. She was young enough to feel wonder at the storm, but old enough to notice the worry etched into her father's brow. Behind them, Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd, sat upright and alert. His black and tan coat glistened in the dim light, his muscular frame steady even as the truck bounced over puddles. Amber eyes darted constantly to the windows, ears flicking at every sound of thunder, his body ready for command. Rex was no ordinary dog. He was Jack's partner, a retired military K9 who had worked alongside him in the field. Tonight he was restless, sensing a danger neither man nor child yet saw. The storm thickened, visibility shrinking, but Jack pressed forward, determined to bring his daughter safely home. He muttered reassurances to Emily, his voice deep but gentle, though his eyes never left the shimmering road. In the rearview mirror he caught a glimpse of Rex, and for a moment the quiet bond between soldier and dog tightened, as if both man and beast remembered too clearly that danger often arrived when least expected. Emily yawned, clutching her bear tighter, and her father reached a hand back briefly to squeeze her small fingers. For a fleeting second, they were only a family fighting through bad weather. Then the storm delivered more than rain. Out of the darkness, headlights burst into view, far too close and moving far too fast. A black SUV roared down the opposite lane, swerving with purpose rather than accident. Jack's instincts screamed as he jerked the wheel, but the slick road betrayed him. The SUV smashed into the truck's side with a violent crash, metal twisting and glass shattering in a deafening roar. The truck lurched sideways, spinning into the ditch, and the world turned upside down. Emily's scream was lost in the thunder as the vehicle rolled once, then slammed against a tree with a final, bone-shaking impact. Inside, chaos fell into silence. Jack slumped forward, unconscious, a thin line of blood tracing down his temple. Emily, jolted against the restraints, hung limp in her seat, her teddy bear flung to the floor. Smoke hissed from the bent hood, the headlights flickering weakly against the storm. In the back, Rex scrambled against the broken glass, shaking his head before shoving his powerful body through the shattered window. He landed in the mud with a growl, water streaming off his fur, and without hesitation bounded back to the truck. His jaws worked at the seatbelt straps, pulling, tugging, until Emily came free. With a whimpering bark, he nudged her limp body onto his back, crouching low to bear the weight. The little girl's head fell against his neck, her lips pale, breath shallow, and Rex barked once into the storm before setting off at a run. Through the rain and darkness, Rex carried his burden, his paws striking the road with urgency. He knew where to go, not through thought, but through memory. There was a house he remembered, a scent etched in his mind from friendlier days. Clara Johnson's house, the woman who had once given him scraps of food, who had smelled of antiseptic and soap, a woman who had touched his head with steady hands. The storm tore at him, soaking his fur, but he pressed on, muscles straining under the child's weight. His eyes burned amber fire in the dark, a soldier's determination driving him forward. At the edge of Riverton Hills, Clara Johnson sat in her modest home, listening to the storm drum against her windows. She was 60 years old, her back not as straight as it once had been, but her spirit unyielding. Her hair was cropped short and silver, framing a face marked by both years and resilience. Once, she had been a military nurse, tending to young men in foreign fields, patching wounds under fire, her hands steady while the world fell apart around her. Those days were long gone, but the habits remained. Even in retirement, she moved with readiness, the kind born of experience, the kind that never truly faded. The barking came sudden, fierce against the howling of the storm. Clara startled, her heart leaping as she rose from her chair. The sound was insistent, demanding, not the bark of a stray, but the cry of desperation. She pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and moved to the door, her breath quickening as the sound grew louder. With a decisive motion, she unlatched the door and the wind nearly tore it from her grasp. What she saw froze her. On the threshold stood Rex, soaked to the bone, his body trembling under the weight he carried. Across his strong back lay a little girl, limp and pale, her head lolling against his neck. Clara gasped, recognition sparking even through the shock. This was Jack Carter's dog, the veteran's loyal companion, and the child must be his daughter. "Oh, Lord," she whispered, before instincts overtook her. She dropped to her knees, gathering the child into her arms, her hands instantly checking for breath, for pulse, for life. Rex barked once more, then sank down, his body quivering with exhaustion, his eyes locked on Clara as if pleading for her to do what he could not. Clara carried Emily inside, laying her gently on the couch near the fireplace. Her movements were practiced, efficient, born of 1,000 emergencies faced long ago. She checked the airway, tilted the chin, pressed 2 fingers to the tiny wrist until she felt the faint flutter of a pulse. Relief surged, but she did not waste a second. She grabbed a thick blanket, wrapping the child tight, then hurried to stoke the fire until warmth filled the room. She rubbed the girl's arms, whispering softly, though the child did not respond, her voice a mixture of command and compassion. "Stay with me, baby. Don't you leave me now." Rex paced nearby, dripping water onto the floor, his amber eyes never leaving the girl. His body shook, but his focus remained absolute. Clara glanced at him, her voice firm but kind. "You did well, soldier. You brought her home." The dog's ears flicked, and though he could not answer, the tension in his body eased slightly, as if reassured by her words. Then Emily stirred, her lips parting in a fragile whisper. "Save my daddy." The words were faint but clear, cutting through the storm outside and lodging deep in Clara's chest. The child's eyelids fluttered once before closing again, her small body sinking into exhausted sleep. Clara sat back, her hands pressed gently on the girl's forehead, her mind already racing. Somewhere out there, in the wreckage of a truck lost to the storm, lay the father. A soldier. A man she barely knew. But a human life all the same. She looked toward the door, the rain still pouring in sheets, and her jaw tightened with resolve. Tonight she had saved one, but her work was far from finished. The storm had not eased. Rain hammered the earth as though the sky itself meant to drown Riverton Hills, and the wind howled through the trees with relentless force. Clara Johnson tightened the blanket around the little girl who now lay safe on her couch, her pulse faint but steady. She knew the child would survive the night if warmth and rest held, but her words still echoed in Clara's mind. "Save my daddy." That plea was not one Clara could ignore, not when her own past was bound to saving men who had once cried out on battlefields half a world away. She pulled her coat tighter and whistled sharply. Rex, who had not stopped pacing by the door, ears pricked and eyes burning, bolted to her side at once. His fur was still slick with rain, his body trembling with tension, but his movements were purposeful, eager. He barked once and scratched at the door, his gaze demanding. Clara nodded, knowing she would follow him back into the storm, into whatever danger remained. She glanced once more at the child on the couch, brushed the girl's damp hair from her forehead, and whispered, "Hold on, little one. I'll bring him back." Then she stepped outside, letting Rex take the lead. The road was slick and treacherous, the rain whipping into Clara's face until her breath came short, but Rex never hesitated. His paws slapped against the soaked earth, his nose low, guiding them along the winding path until headlights gleamed faintly through the sheets of water. Clara's heart clenched as the wreck came into view, Jack Carter's truck, crumpled like paper against the embankment, steam rising in ghostly wisps from the ruined hood. The smell of gasoline lingered faint in the air, sharp against the wet wind, and Clara quickened her steps, her mind already preparing for what she would find. She reached the driver's side, her boots sinking into the mud as she leaned close to the shattered window. The sight froze her breath. Jack Carter, the soldier she had seen only in passing at town gatherings, was slumped against the seatbelt, his head bleeding from a deep gash at the temple. His broad chest rose and fell in uneven rhythm, shallow and strained. The steering column had collapsed inward, pinning his legs tight, and broken glass glittered across his arms and jacket. For a moment Clara saw not just a man but a memory. Young soldiers in desert uniforms, faces pale with shock, trapped in twisted metal. The battlefield had followed her home. Her training surged forward, steadying her hands even as the rain made them slick. She reached through the window, two fingers pressing against his neck. The beat was weak but present. She pressed cloth from her pocket against the bleeding temple, holding firm until the flow slowed. Then, with a practiced motion, she slipped off her own coat, folded it lengthwise, and braced it behind his neck, immobilizing him against further injury. The storm howled. Rex barked once in agitation, but Clara's movements remained deliberate, precise, born of years spent in combat hospitals where hesitation meant death. Jack stirred faintly, his eyelids fluttering under the pounding rain. A groan slipped from his throat, rough and pained, as he struggled to open his eyes. At first he saw only darkness and rain streaking against glass. Then Clara's lined face came into focus, her hands steady against his wounds. "Easy now," she murmured, voice firm, the same tone she had used on countless soldiers before him. Jack blinked, disoriented, then recognition dawned. His voice rasped, broken but audible. You've done this before." "Army medic?" Clara's lips pressed into a tight line, then she nodded once. "Nurse Corps." Long ago, that simple truth pierced through the fog in his mind. Jack's chest rose with a ragged breath, his gaze settling on her with something like relief. He was a man who had lived his life trusting skill under fire, and now, in the storm and the wreck, he recognized the same surety in her. He tried to speak again, but his throat caught, leaving only a whisper of gratitude in his eyes. Clara touched his shoulder gently, assuring him she was not leaving, that his daughter was alive, safe, waiting for him. His face softened, a flicker of peace in the chaos. Around them, the night was far from still. Rex growled low, his body rigid as he stared out toward the road. Clara followed his gaze and, through the veil of rain, caught the faint gleam of headlights lingering far off, stationary. The black SUV. It sat there at a distance, silent, the engine purring low like a predator watching prey. Clara's gut twisted. This was no accident of weather, no random strike of misfortune. But she kept her fear buried, for panic would only weaken the man before her. She turned back to Jack, her voice calm even as her eyes sharpened. "We'll get you out, soldier. Stay with me." Her hands moved quickly, assessing the damage. The seatbelt was jammed, but she cut through it with a sharp fragment of glass she pried from the frame. The steering wheel pressed cruelly against his legs, but she braced herself against the mud, leveraging her body to shift it enough to give him breath. Each movement drew a groan from Jack, but his eyes never left hers, clinging to her voice as anchor. She spoke steadily, recounting each action so he would not drift away, words like a lifeline in the storm. "Pressure's holding, neck's secure, you're alive, and your girl is waiting." Lightning ripped across the sky, bathing the scene in white light, and in that flash, Clara saw the sweat mixing with rain on Jack's brow, the clenched line of his jaw, the soldier's will refusing to surrender. Rex barked sharply, a warning that the SUV had shifted closer, but Clara did not allow herself to look again. One life at a time, she told herself. One life saved before the next battle came. She adjusted the makeshift support around his neck and leaned close, her voice low but unyielding. "You're not done yet." "Not tonight," Jack exhaled heavily, his lips moving in a faint smile despite the pain. "Then I'll hold, because you say so." His eyes closed again, but this time it was not surrender, it was trust. And in that trust, Clara felt the weight of what had begun, a bond forged not in choice, but in necessity, in storm and blood and the echo of war. Behind them, Rex stood guard, his growl constant, amber eyes locked on the lurking SUV, the storm painting him as both sentinel and warning. Clara tightened her grip on Jack's shoulder, the rain soaking them both, and whispered, "You're safe now. I've got you." The storm had finally passed. By morning, Riverton Hills lay under a gray sky, the streets damp and shining as if the town had been scrubbed clean of the night's violence. Inside Clara Johnson's modest home, the smell of brewed coffee mingled with the faint scent of antiseptic. Jack Carter sat stiffly in the armchair by the window, his head bandaged, his leg braced with makeshift support. His body ached from every movement, but his mind was restless, unable to silence the truth he had carried too long. Clara moved quietly through the kitchen, her motions steady and efficient, the habit of someone long used to caring for others in silence. She placed a mug of coffee near Jack, then looked to where his daughter still slept on the couch, her small chest rising and falling with peaceful rhythm. Rex lay close by, ears twitching at every sound, his amber eyes always alert. Clara sat opposite Jack, her gaze firm yet patient, the gaze of someone waiting for him to begin. Jack cleared his throat, his voice low, weighed down by more than pain. "What happened last night wasn't chance. That SUV wasn't just reckless." He paused, searching her eyes for judgment, but found only calm attention. "Before I left the service, I uncovered something I wasn't supposed to. A smuggling route, weapons moving through our bases, handed off to people who should never have touched them. I reported it, but the trail was buried, like it never existed. So I kept copies, records, logs, names, evidence." Clara's face tightened, the lines of age deepening with memory. She clasped her hands together, recalling her own losses. "They came after you because of that," she said, her voice soft yet edged with certainty. Jack nodded, exhaling heavily. "They want to silence me. Last night was no accident. That SUV was a warning, maybe even an execution attempt. If not for Rex and you, I wouldn't be here." His gaze drifted to his daughter, then back to Clara, filled with both fear and determination. "But I can't destroy what I've held. Too many men died looking the other way." For a moment silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the ticking of Clara's old clock on the mantel. Then she leaned forward, her voice carrying a weight of her own grief. "I know what it is to lose someone to war and to silence. My husband was a soldier. He didn't come home. They told me it was classified, told me nothing more. I lived with that void for decades, and I swore I would never again accept silence forced upon me." Her eyes shone, not with tears, but with fire. "You are not alone in this fight, Jack." Jack studied her face, seeing in her not just compassion but conviction born of pain. He had carried the burden of betrayal and danger alone for months, but now he felt the faint stirrings of trust. He nodded slowly, his jaw set. "Then maybe it's time I stopped running from this." Rex shifted at his feet, letting out a low rumble as if echoing his decision. Clara reached out, her hand briefly resting on Jack's forearm, a gesture not of pity but of solidarity. Later that morning, a knock rattled the front door. Clara opened it to find Charles Harris, her neighbor from across the street. He was in his late 60s, a wiry man with sharp eyes that missed little, dressed in a faded flannel shirt and worn boots. His hair was thinning, his jaw stubborn, and though he walked with a slight limp, his posture was straight. Harris glanced past Clara into the house, his voice hushed but urgent. "You should see this. My cameras, the ones I keep pointed at the street, they caught that SUV circling last night." More than once Clara stepped aside, and Harris entered, pulling a small USB drive from his pocket. His hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from fear. "I've talked to the shop owners down on Main. Their security feeds show the same vehicle moving through the area before and after the crash, but they won't speak up. Too scared. Too many times people who talk find themselves out of business. Or worse." He met Clara's eyes, his voice steady now. "But I'm not looking the other way. Not when I saw what that truck tried to do. Jack listened intently as Harris set up the footage on Clara's old laptop. The grainy video showed the SUV creeping past homes, pausing under streetlights, its dark windows reflecting nothing. Then came the timestamp from just before the crash, the vehicle tailing Jack's pickup along the deserted road. Clara felt her stomach tighten, confirmation of what she had already known. Harris leaned back, exhaling. "I can't give this to the sheriff. He's in too deep with the people who own that car, but you—" His eyes shifted to Jack, then back to Clara. "You might just be able to do something with it." Jack's jaw clenched, the soldier in him bristling with both anger and clarity. "This is bigger than me. They know I still have the evidence. That's why they won't stop." He pressed a hand against the bandage at his temple, his voice steady but grim. "But if we connect this to the smuggling, if we gather more pieces, we can expose them, not just survive them." Clara's gaze held his, the same resolve mirrored in her lined face. Outside, the sky brightened briefly as the sun broke through clouds, casting pale light across wet streets. Yet the weight of conspiracy hung heavy inside the small home, the air charged with unspoken promises. Harris tucked his hands into his pockets, shoulders squared despite the danger he knew. "I'll keep watch," he said simply. "Cameras stay on day and night. If that SUV comes near again, you'll know first." Clara nodded, gratitude in her eyes, but also worry for the man who risked himself by standing beside them. Jack shifted in his chair, every movement pained, but his voice firm. "This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about standing against men who think they can decide who lives and who disappears. If they want to fight, they've found one." Rex thumped his tail once against the floor, eyes still locked on the window as if the shadows themselves hid enemies. Clara rose, her spine straight despite her years, and said with quiet certainty, "Then let's be ready. No one silences us." The weight of Harris's footage still lingered in the air long after he had left. Jack sat hunched forward, his bandaged head aching, his hands pressed tightly against his knees as though bracing himself for the storm he knew would come. Clara stood near the window, the thin curtains pulled aside just enough for her to scan the quiet street. And Rex, restless and sharp-eyed, prowled near the door, sensing that the night had merely pulled back its veil, not disappeared. They all understood one thing: the shadows circling them had names, uniforms, and authority. Jack's voice was rough but steady as he explained what Harris's evidence meant. The SUV wasn't just random muscle. It's tied to someone in law enforcement, someone local. That's how they could stalk us so openly, how they knew where to strike. Clara's eyes narrowed, her mind already connecting threads. She had seen enough bureaucracy to know corruption was never far from power. "If that's true," she said quietly, "then we're not just up against criminals. We're up against the very people sworn to protect us." Jack nodded grimly, his daughter sleeping nearby in another room, unaware of the danger clawing at their doorstep. By afternoon, Clara had prepared a plan. Her years as a field nurse had taught her the importance of precision under fire, of acting with purpose rather than hesitation. She and Jack followed the SUV's trail using Harris's intel, cross-referencing timestamps with traffic cameras Harris had access to. The black vehicle was traced to the edge of town, parked frequently at a disused warehouse near the industrial district. Clara packed only essentials, a flashlight, a first aid kit, and the quiet resolve of someone who had nothing left to fear. Jack, though injured, refused to remain behind. Rex padded silently beside them, the weight of his harness like a badge of duty. The warehouse loomed under the fading light, its corrugated walls streaked with rust, its windows dark like watching eyes. A faint smell of oil and damp metal filled the air as they approached. Clara gestured for silence, her hand firm but calm, and Jack moved slowly at her side, his breath shallow from the pain in his ribs. Rex's ears twitched, his nose lifted, muscles taut with anticipation. The silence was too thick, too expectant, and Clara knew the trap had already been laid. Still, they pressed on, their shadows stretching long across cracked concrete. The ambush came with sudden violence. A door slammed open, and 3 men surged from the shadows, their faces obscured by masks, their movements sharp and coordinated. Rex snarled, launching forward with explosive force, his teeth flashing as he barreled into the first attacker, driving him to the ground with a guttural growl. Clara moved with surprising swiftness for her age, her body remembering the discipline of training long past. She swung her flashlight with the weight of conviction, striking the second man across the jaw, then pivoted, her stance low, driving her shoulder into his chest until he collapsed against the wall. Jack, still weak but unwilling to surrender, caught the third man as he lunged. The impact rattled his healing ribs, but adrenaline burned hotter than pain. He locked the man's arm, twisted with practiced precision, and sent him sprawling to the ground. The struggle was brutal, clumsy at times given Jack's injuries, but his resolve carried him through. For a moment, the warehouse echoed with chaos boots scraping, Rex's snarls, muffled curses. But then, just as suddenly, silence returned. Clara stood breathing heavily, Jack's knuckles raw, and Rex hovered, hackles raised, standing guard over the groaning body of the first assailant. Clara's flashlight beam cut through the gloom, landing on a small recording device that had fallen from one of the men's pockets in the scuffle. Jack picked it up, his hands trembling not from weakness, but from the weight of discovery. He pressed play, and the warehouse filled with voices, grainy but unmistakable. The sound of uniformed men, local officers talking in low, casual tones about shipments, about covering up paperwork, about making sure certain problems disappeared quietly. The words weren't just damning, they were deadly, proof of the corruption embedded deep within the town. Jack's face hardened as the recording continued. He recognized one voice in particular, sharp and commanding, the voice of a local officer he had once trusted, a man often seen in the sheriff's office. Clara caught his gaze and saw the truth in it. They were standing not at the edge of a conspiracy, but at its very heart. Rex let out a low growl as if echoing their realization, his body still bristling with unease. The evidence in their hands could ignite a firestorm, but it also painted targets squarely on their backs. They didn't linger. Clara urged them toward the exit, her instincts screaming that more danger lurked beyond the darkness. Supporting Jack as they moved, she cast one final glance at the fallen assailants, men who would wake with bruises but not with victory. The trio slipped back into the wet night, their breath visible in the chill air, their footsteps quick against the cracked pavement. Every shadow felt heavier, every sound sharper, but in Clara's hand the recording device buzzed like a fragile heartbeat of truth. When they reached the safety of her home, Clara set the recorder gently on the table. The glow from a single lamp lit the room, casting long, tired shadows across their faces. Jack's daughter stirred from her sleep in the corner, unaware of how close her father had come to being silenced forever. Jack lowered himself into a chair, his eyes locked on the recorder. "Now we know," he whispered, the words carrying both relief and dread. Clara nodded, her voice firm. The accident was never the end. It was the beginning. And behind it lies more than men in masks. It's a whole network that thinks fear will keep us quiet. Rex stretched out near the door, his breathing steady but his ears still alert, as though ready to leap again at the first sign of threat. Clara poured Jack a glass of water, her expression solemn but resolute. "We have proof," she said softly, "and proof changes everything." Outside, the night was still and deceptively calm, but inside, the walls of silence had cracked. They had torn a piece of the darkness away. And though danger loomed larger than ever, for the first time, the truth had a voice. The night after their narrow escape from the warehouse was heavy with silence, but it was not the silence of defeat. In Clara's modest kitchen, the recorder still sat on the table like an unblinking eye, holding within it the voices of corruption that had ruled their town. Jack leaned against the counter, exhaustion etched into his pale face, his wounds throbbing yet ignored. Clara brewed coffee in her old tin kettle, her hands steady, her eyes calm, the mind of a woman who had seen battlefields both abroad and at home. Rex rested near the door, his head on his paws, but his amber eyes never truly closed. By dawn, Clara had already made her decision. She knew that evidence hidden was evidence wasted. With her years of service as a military nurse, she had forged bonds across places and times, and among those bonds was a woman named Evelyn Shaw. A journalist, strong-willed and relentless, who had once reported from war zones and now wrote for regional papers with national reach. Clara reached for the phone, her voice low but urgent as she recounted what had happened, the SUV, the ambush, the recording. Evelyn's reply was firm and without hesitation. "I'll be there by noon." This story deserves the light. The morning stretched on, and Clara prepared her home as if preparing a forward post. Jack's little girl played on the rug with her toy animals, oblivious to the storm swirling around her, though every now and then she would glance toward her father, sensing his unease. Jack watched Clara carefully, recognizing the discipline in her movements, the calm she carried that reminded him of medics patching soldiers under fire. "You're not afraid, are you?" he asked quietly. Clara met his gaze, her expression steady. "I've already lost more than fear could ever take from me. What matters now is truth." When Evelyn arrived, she was exactly as Clara remembered, tall, her dark hair streaked with silver, her eyes sharp behind thin-rimmed glasses, a voice that carried both authority and empathy. She stepped into the living room with a notepad and a recorder of her own, greeted Jack warmly, then crouched to smile at the child who peeked shyly from behind her father's leg. Clara wasted no time, setting the incriminating recorder on the table and pressing play. Evelyn listened, her pen moving swiftly, her face hardening as the voices filled the room. When the recording ended, she looked up and said, "This isn't just a town story. This is federal. We'll make sure it reaches the right ears." The following day, the town's community hall was fuller than it had ever been. Word had spread quickly that something important was about to be revealed. Clara entered quietly, with Jack at her side, his steps slow but determined, his daughter clutching Clara's hand as though it were the safest anchor in the world. Rex padded behind them, his presence commanding silent respect. Rows of folding chairs creaked as townspeople shifted nervously, their eyes flicking toward the small group that had come to break the silence. In the back, Evelyn's camera crew set up their equipment, beams of light cutting across the dim room. Clara stepped onto the low stage, her figure straight, her voice calm yet carrying strength. She spoke not of herself, but of the truth uncovered, of the SUV, of the warehouse, of the betrayal by those meant to protect. Jack followed, his voice breaking as he recounted the ambush and the attempt on his life, and finally he played the recording for all to hear. Gasps rippled through the crowd, heads turned, whispers grew into outrage as the familiar voices of law enforcement discussing smuggling filled the air. No one could deny it, no one could look away. Outside, reporters gathered, microphones thrust forward as the news began to spread beyond Riverton Hills. By the time the meeting ended, Evelyn had already transmitted the story to her editor. Within hours, major outlets had picked it up, headlines flashing across screens. "Small town exposes police corruption linked to weapons smuggling." Federal authorities arrived before dusk, the unmistakable jackets of the FBI cutting through the crowd, their presence a symbol that the circle of fear had been broken. As the town buzzed with the chaos of revelation, Jack turned to Clara, his eyes wet though his voice was steady. "You didn't just save my little girl. You didn't just save me. You've given us back our lives." He clasped her hand tightly, the strength of a soldier acknowledging another kind of warrior. His daughter threw her arms around Clara's waist, her small voice ringing with innocence and truth. "Grandma Clara." The title was not just affection, but recognition, an adoption of spirit. Clara's arms closed gently around the child, her heart both heavy and lifted. The days that followed were a blur of arrests, resignations, and revelations. Names once untouchable were dragged into the open, the sheriff's office was purged, the network dismantled piece by piece. Reporters camped outside Riverton Hills, but for Clara, Jack, and the child, the storm was already passing. One quiet evening, Clara sat on her porch, the sun dipping low, painting the sky with amber and rose. Rex lay at her feet, his breathing calm, his loyalty unbroken. In the yard, Jack laughed for the first time in weeks, his daughter's giggles rising like bells as he chased her across the grass. Clara watched them with a quiet smile, her hands folded in her lap, her heart steady. She had once been overlooked, dismissed, judged by the color of her skin and the simplicity of her life. But tonight, the town saw her for who she truly was. Not just a caretaker, not just a neighbor, but a symbol of resilience, compassion, and unyielding strength. The night air was soft against her face, carrying with it the laughter of a child, the warmth of justice won, and the peace of knowing that even in the darkest storms, a single act of courage could light the way for many. In the end, Clara's story is more than just about one woman, one soldier, and one loyal dog. It is a reminder that true strength is not found in power or status, but in the quiet courage of those who rise above prejudice, who choose compassion over bitterness, and who sacrifice in silence so others may live in peace. These are the heroes who rarely make the headlines, but they change the world in ways no one can measure. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts, because your voice matters. And do not forget to subscribe so you can join us in keeping these stories alive. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace and strength, just as He blessed Clara in her darkest hour.